Kia ora, Judy. How are you?
Kia ora, Lisa. I'm good, thank you. And you?
I'm doing very well.
Excellent.
Thanks for discussing this particularly quite a gnarly situation with me. I've had a fictitious but quite complicated employment issue come across my desk that I was wanting to talk to you about in confidence. The fact scenarios include this is an ongoing employment relationship, and can I just talk to you a bit about the parties, and then
Sure.
we might discuss how the mediation might proceed. So this is an employment relationship problem at a farm called Craigie Point, and Mr. McRae is he's an older gentleman and he is the owner of the farm. Mr. McRae, unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, found the relatively new farm worker, Tracy, crying in the kitchen. And bearing in mind, Mr. McRae doesn't play any fundamental part in the management of the farm any longer, although he does own it. The management of the farm is by Craig, his son, who is the farm manager. And Craig's lived on the farm for his whole life, really, and knows the farm like the back of his hand, and is a very successful farmer. He's taken over from his father very, very successfully. They've had a new farmhand come to work on the farm. That's Tracy. She has reflected to Mr. McRae, who went to his accountant, and then his accountant didn't have any experience in resolving employment relationship problems, and it's how it's come to me. But Tracy has been having some problems with Craig, and that communication seems to have completely shut down between them. Tracy is concerned about what she sees as some animal welfare issues, with Craig flicking the tails of the dairy herd going into the milking shed. She's finding some of Craig's jokes or his humour sexist, and she's just finding it really hard to cope because she's a relatively recent graduate from Lincoln University, so she's really au fait with all the new technology and all the new learnings on animal welfare. And she's also worked overseas in France and in Spain on different farms, so she's coming to the farm with a fresh set of eyes. Whereas Craig, she thinks, is rather stuck in his ways. Craig has noticed that Tracy has recently become very shut down and almost non-communicative, and there's been a real change in her personality from his point of view. She was bubbly and energetic and enthusiastic when she first started, but now there's barely a word that passes between them when they do their operation in the milking shed. And so, obviously Mr. McRae is really concerned about this because the farm been running pretty well up until this point, and his accountant has suggested a mediation. So I was wanting to talk to you about ongoing employment relationships. Both Craig and Tracy are really inclined towards resolving the problem. They really both really love their jobs and want things to be sorted out and to be improved. So, yeah, I was wondering what would be your first step with these particular parties, being Mr. McRae, Craig, and Tracy? What would you do?
Well, I think, thanks, Lisa. What I would do is obviously have a chat to each of them separately before we even thought about the sort of process that we might put in place. I'd talk to the owner, Mr. McRae, and see what it was that his main interest was in getting this issue resolved. Most likely it would be about productivity and a happy workplace. He would indicate, I guess, whether he's not wanting to take sides, which is why he isn't intervening, because he doesn't want to take his son's side or get offside with either of them. Exactly. So, which is why mediation can be useful, to have a neutral facilitator of the discussions. So I would talk to him and see what it is he would like to achieve, and perhaps sort of coach him a little bit in the process that we might follow and what I might expect of him in that process.
I see.
As the mediator. So I would say, perhaps or we can talk about this later, but so with each of the parties, I talked to them about what were the issues that were concerning them, what would they like to get out of the mediation. I'd also be building a relationship with them so they would trust me and the process that I would help them work through. So I would talk through the process so they would know exactly what to expect and how to prepare for it. And I might do a bit of coaching about how they might bring the issues to the discussion in a way that isn't too emotive. So sort of ensuring that they describe what's happened and the impact it's had on them. At the same time, you'd be assessing whether they needed any extra support, for example, if they were highly emotional about it, whether having some extra support in the process might be good for them.
How about support people at mediation for an ongoing employment relationship?
Well, it very much depends on the circumstances, and you would assess that, I guess, in the pre-mediation sessions. If you felt that each person was articulate and able to discuss the issues and sort of a certain robustness, you might think that they'd be okay on their own, but you'd always offer that option that they could bring a support person, bearing in mind that the issues are between these two workers. They're the ones that are there, that've been there, and that support people can only really support emotionally rather than get involved in the actual issues.
I think they'll be okay with the assistance of you or me as the mediator. What part, if any, would Mr. McRae play in the mediation process?
Well, I always think in this sort of mediation, it's important that the owner or the manager of the workplace attends to show and to give an overview of the issues as they see it and what they want out of the mediation, and also to sort of to show that each employee is valued, so they've got an interest in the ongoing relationship. And also not to be present during the discussions between the two employees themselves, but to be present at the end when the employees might have come up with some ideas for resolving the issues, just to ensure that they can in fact be implemented and that they are in line with what the workplace practices are.
Okay, right. So to be available for
Yes.
you know, I guess bookending the beginning and the closure of mediation. Okay, perfect. All right. So I can imagine a scenario where Craig and Tracy are feeling pretty comfortable with the prospect of coming to mediation after their separate pre-mediation meetings with you. What kind of coaching would you do with the parties? Because this has become a communication breakdown, as you know, a lot of matters that come to mediation are. How would you get the parties started in talking to each other in the joint session? Would you have any inclination? Would you have any made any decision about who goes first or anything like that?
Well, I think that's something I would talk to the parties about in the pre-mediation sessions, about who would go first, so we get that agreement before they come together, so that it doesn't become an issue that's still is in dispute at the table.
Yes.
I think if they can't agree who would be best to go first between them, then the mediator could make a call on that. And it's quite usual, common to think about is it the person who's brought the issue? So in this situation, it was Tracy who was found crying that made Mr. McRae aware of that there was an issue. So it might be useful for her to go first, bearing in mind that the other party is going to have exactly the same opportunity to talk through the issues from their perspective as well. And that's for the mediator to provide that balance for each of them. In terms of coaching, that's sort of what we were talking about before, probably talking to them about the use of highly emotive words. And I'll use an example such as bullying. So Tracy might have experienced some of Craig's behaviour as bullying to her, and it felt that way
she's
for
used
her.
that language. Yes.
And harassment is another word that has quite loaded. So rather than saying you're a bully or you've
Mm-hmm.
sexually harassed me, which are quite the
Yes.
emotive words,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage her to talk through the behaviour that she's observed or experienced and the
Mm-hmm.
impact that it's had on her. And
Mm-hmm.
likewise for Craig, if he's feeling that she's an upstart or he might be feeling threatened by the fact that she's got all his educational qualifications. You might encourage him to describe what that's like for
Yeah,
him
he
and the
might be
impact that
feeling, yeah,
it's had on him.
yeah.
Um, the reason for that is that when you say something like you're a bully,
Mm-hmm.
the most likely response is no, I'm not,
Yes.
or to be quite defensive. Whereas if you describe the behaviour, you're more likely to get a better understanding from the other party.
Mm. So in this exactly in this scenario, even though Tracy has not described Craig as a bully or a sexist pig or anything incredibly loaded like that, she has described some of the behaviour that she doesn't really think is very good for animal husbandry. The pulling of the tails and the things like that, and because he recognizes that there's a grain of truth in some of his maybe habits that he's gotten into, there could come a point in the mediation where he becomes quite defensive in that he wants to show that he wants to acknowledge that perhaps some of his practices are old-fashioned and need to be updated, but he doesn't want to appear weak. What kind of coaching and he is a man of few words, so what kind of coaching would you give to Craig about how he could begin to respond to Tracy in a situation like this?
So it's an important part of the process that you can tell the parties to expect that you might talk to them privately through the process. And
Mm-hmm.
what I often like to do is if one person goes first, I often like to give the other person the opportunity to have a break just to reflect on what they've heard so they don't clam up or they don't
Yes.
respond defensively immediately or
Yes.
react
Great
defensively.
idea.
So
Yeah.
they've got a little bit of time just to think through what's been talked about and
Mm.
what their views are on that, but also make sure that they get to have this, the opportunity to say what's important for them as well. So in the coaching, you might be giving a bit of acknowledgements to that party to say that might have been a bit tough to hear some of that. What's your thoughts on
Mm.
that? So give
Mm.
them the opportunity to articulate that. So that's sort of hearing it out loud, I guess, from their perspective,
Yes.
but also
Yeah.
you can show a little bit of empathy to how they are without siding with the other party, of course. But
Mm.
that must have been hard to hear some of
Mm.
that.
Mm.
What are your
Mm.
thoughts about it? Perhaps you'd like to go in and talk about how you see, the farm working well, or,
Mm.
what are your priorities for the farm?
Yes. Yes. So
That sort of
empathy
thing to help
without
them to sort of,
sympathy, without taking
that's
sides.
right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Right. So
acknowledgement
and
that,
acknowledgement, yeah, that he
yeah.
has heard. Yeah, I heard what you said. I
Mm-hmm.
heard what you said, and um, I there could be there could be something in what you're saying about animal husbandry. There could be some new ideas that you have that I
Yes,
might take on board.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so in joint session after they've both presented their account of events, they do start to have a good conversation. And you can see as the mediator that um, they are finding some common interests. What would be your next intervention or the next step to help them to move from what has happened in the past where they've become stuck to how they could have a better relationship? What are some of the things that you might talk to them about in that part of the mediation? Sometimes we call it moving from first position to second position. I think it is, to shift gears and look to the future.
So looking to the future here, and that's, I mean, one of the mediator's roles, isn't it, is to maintain a bit of momentum. So you don't want people to be going over and over things that have happened. So sort of a question in this situation might be, a useful question could be, so what does a good relationship look like, a good working relationship look like for each of you? And invite them each to contribute to that question. Being careful not to aim it at one party or the other, so making it a broad general question. And then I suppose to get some ideas from each of them and then start thinking about, so how would you be able to make that work? And then get some ideas from each of them. So that's how I would probably approach it. I might check in with each of them separately at a point where they're sort of putting some ideas out there to see how it could work better. I might check in with each of them individually just to ensure that everything that's on their mind has been covered. And that this is going in a way that they feel comfortable with and it's going to help resolve the issues.
Yes, because there's the danger that one party might be rather more agreeable or, and just be saying yes for the sake of yes, or the parties might be getting tired and just be saying yes to get themselves out of there.
That's right.
Would you need to commit any of this to any kind of paperwork or anything like that, an agreement?
I've always found it's quite useful just to capture some of the guidelines they're talking about. So they're more like guidelines for behaviour for the future because, life changes for humans. We're dealing with a relationship issues, and what's important over the next few weeks might not be as important a month later. But for example, capturing some of the headlines, if you like, say we will meet regularly at a certain time each day to ensure that any issues that have come up can be discussed, and we will listen to each other. We'll agree on the music that's played each day, and we'll make sure that we have a moment after each milking session to reflect on what worked well and what didn't, or what could go better. And then it's those sort of capturing those, as I think you've called it, a memorandum of understanding rather than a contract or an agreement that could be enforced in a court of law. We're not talking about
we're
that
not
sort
talking
of
a
thing.
149
No.
about the radio station and the milking shed.
No, and then we're going to put those guidelines to Mr. McRae, and we're going to say, are these things that you're happy with? Will this work in your farm? Do you think this will help the issues that you're concerned about, and will you support it? So will you give them time to do this? Will you ensure they have tea and coffee and those sort of things?
Yes, and that sounds like a good way to ultimately to bring the mediation to a close. Is everybody together, or is that how it can work sometimes?
I think it's nice when you've got a relationship and they're going to go off and work, and go back to work maybe, that they come together. And, at that time, they probably haven't gone through the process. They're probably both feeling really relieved. They might, feel motivated to acknowledge each other's commitment and some good point or another about each other's work. So that can always be very helpful. And I think also that Mr. McRae is going to be pretty happy if they get to an agreement.
I think so. Yeah, they might all go off to the pub.
They might.
Oh, Judy, I'm feeling a lot more cheerful about this pending fictitious mediation.
You'll be fabulous, Lisa.
In all seriousness, thank you very much for all of those tips and pointers. And I think next podcast we're going to deal with something a bit more adversarial, a bit more crunchy, when perhaps the parties are not maybe in agreement about coming to mediation, and if they do arrive at mediation, things might be rather different than an ongoing employment relationship.
Sure. I look
Thank
forward
you
to
very
it.
much. Yeah, me
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Judy.
Bye. Bye.